Ever since September 11th, when an airliner abruptly goes silent over American airspace, it has triggered an immediate query. Was the silence caused by a basic radio outage or something far more sinister? The narrative of Northwest Airlines Flight 188 is as follows. The current date is October 21st, 2009. Two senior pilots prepare for a routine voyage from San Diego, California to Minneapolis, Minnesota. This journey normally takes just over 3 hours. In the left seat rests a 53-year-old veteran captain with over 18,000 flight hours. Almost half of that experience was gained from commanding aircraft analogous to the A320. He'll be the pilot flying for this voyage. The first officer, age 54, provides a similar depth of experience, nearly 14,000 hours total, with over 5,300 specifically in this aircraft type. The first officer will be pilot monitoring. As is reasonably prevalent in large airlines, this was only the pilot's second day working together as a crew. On board are 144 passengers, 3 flight attendants, and 2 pilots. Their aircraft, an Airbus A320, is a popular mainstay for many airlines. Its advanced automation system and fly-by-wire controls are intended to decrease pilot workload and improve safety. The aircraft is equipped with a comprehensive communication suite, which includes 3 distinct VHF radios, capable of operating independently. This redundancy is intended to guarantee that the aircraft is in constant communication with air traffic control, and this will be of significance in the future. Though this was a Northwest Airlines flight, the airline was merging with Delta Airlines. For the sake of context, the merger, which briefly established the world's largest airline, presented intricate challenges for all parties. Pilots from both carriers were abruptly confronted with new standard operating procedures and distinct flight deck protocols. They were required to adjust to new procedures every 2 months as the changes were progressively implemented. A new computerized flight crew scheduling system was among the changes that would shortly be implemented as this narrative progressed. Flight 188 executed a typical departure from San Diego at 4:59 p.m. As the autumn sun begins to set, it ascends to its cruising altitude of flight level 370, or 37,000 feet. Passengers who have settled in for their voyage are served food and beverages by the flight attendants. As is frequently the case with Airbus flight crews, both pilots choose to monitor air traffic control through the cockpit speakers, disregarding their earphones. The aircraft is being meticulously guided by the automation as it proceeds along its pre-programmed course. Thus far, everything has been satisfactory. The lead flight attendant arrives on the flight deck with meals for the pilots, and it is soon dinner time. The captain seizes the opportunity to take a lavatory break. The flight attendant is required to remain in the cockpit until the captain returns, in accordance with security protocols. The first officer contacted Denver Air Traffic Control at 6:39 p.m. The first Denver controller requested that Flight 188 contact the next Denver center approximately 6 minutes later at 6:45 p.m. The first officer acknowledged the request. The first officer contacted the second Denver controller less than a minute later and reported an altitude of 37,000 feet in order to check in. The controller acknowledged this. Upon the captain's return to the cockpit, he and the first officer initiated a conversation regarding the most recent modifications to their airline's preferential bidding procedure. During this period, the controller at the Denver Center was required to retransmit a message to the aircraft. On the second attempt by the Denver controller to contact Flight 188 and instruct it to transition to the subsequent Denver Center on 132.17 megahertz, the first officer responded with, "Okay, 3217 Northwest 188. The first officer's standard readback will be crucial in the future. We will revisit the matter." Although the pilots were unaware of it at the time, the final radio transmission they would make for an extended period occurred at 6:57 p.m. It was not long before the two pilots were deeply engaged in a conversation regarding Delta's new preferential tendering system. The commander was dissatisfied with the schedule he had been assigned for the upcoming month, as it did not align with his personal family obligations. The commander was displeased with this situation and retrieved his laptop to display his schedule to the first officer. The first officer, in an effort to assist, retrieved his own laptop and commenced instructing his colleague on the complexities of the new tendering system. He positioned his laptop on his tray table and proceeded to elaborate on his comprehension of the new system. In contrast to Boeing pilots who are required to navigate control columns between their legs, the A320's side-stick design provides the convenience of tray tables, which are intended for meals rather than impromptu computer sessions. It is worth noting that the use of personal electronic devices, PEDs, during flights was rigorously prohibited. The rule was not solely intended to prevent distractions. Critical flight displays could be obstructed by laptops, and their batteries posed a fire hazard. Neither pilot could have anticipated the magnitude of the repercussions of their seemingly innocuous rule violation. In the interim, at 7:05 p.m., the 3rd Denver sector attempted to communicate with Flight 188 to inform them of the designated frequency for the 4th Denver sector. There was no response. They repeated the transmission. Once more, there was no response. The aircraft entered the airspace of the 4th Denver sector and subsequently the 5th without conducting any radio check-ins. The pilots, who were still engaged in a conversation regarding the new scheduling system, appeared to be unaware of the attempts to reach them upon their return to the aircraft. Then, the situation became more severe. The standard procedures for an aircraft that had gone NORDO, or without radio communications, were initiated by air traffic controllers on the ground. Multiple radio contacts were attempted by Denver Center controllers. Flight 188 had been radio silent for 27 minutes by 7:24 p.m. as it silently traversed sector after sector of airspace. The 5th Denver controller, upon recognizing an issue, contacted the Minneapolis Center to determine whether the aircraft had made contact. Denver attempted to contact Northwest's dispatch office after Minneapolis concurred that they had not received any communication from the aircraft. However, even this proved to be a challenge. They were dialing an antiquated number that had been inactive since a recent office relocation as a result of the merger. Ultimately, the controllers were able to communicate with the dispatch headquarters of Northwest. In the event that radio contact was unsuccessful, airlines could typically communicate with their pilots via ACARE's text messages. At the time, it was not recognized that the pilots were unaware of the green ACARS message alerts discreetly appearing on their displays, even though these messages were indeed reaching the aircraft. Northwest Flight 196 was requested to attempt to communicate with their mute colleagues at 7:39 p.m. Additional ACARS messages were transmitted in dispatch. Each attempt at communication, including the international emergency frequency 121.5 MHz, was unsuccessful, and tensions on the ground began to escalate. The Airbus A320's advanced automation was meticulously adhering to the predetermined flight path, consistently achieving each waypoint. The ECAM display in the cockpit continued to display unacknowledged message alerts, and the flight deck speakers were unable to hear the increasingly urgent communications that were transmitted over various radio frequencies. What was transpiring? Was there a more sinister motive at work, or had both pilots fallen asleep? At 8:01 p.m., the flight management computer exhausted its pre-programmed waypoints and, as anticipated, silently transitioned from navigation to heading mode. Nav transitioned to heading on the principal flight displays. The aircraft adhered to its instructions and proceeded northeast into the increasing darkness, flying a constant heading rather than its intended course. In the meantime, the controllers at Minneapolis Center were experiencing a shortage of alternatives as they grew increasingly apprehensive. Numerous endeavors had been unsuccessful across various frequencies. The Phantom aircraft was inaccessible to other aircraft. Dispatch messages from the company were not being received. Control was transferred to the 4th Minneapolis controller at 8:03 p.m., and he would shortly come to the unsettling realization that the aircraft was about to overfly its destination. Controllers had implemented their protocols for potentially suspicious aircraft, and they were in the process of preparing for military intervention. The Domestic Events Network had been contacted by the Minneapolis operations manager in charge, and fighter aircraft were being prepared for intercept. Additionally, the White House Situation Room was apprised. The conversation regarding personnel scheduling persisted on the flight deck, with neither pilot cognizant of the tension that was developing as a result of their silence. They were unaware that they had exceeded their designated destination, Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport, when their navigational displays indicated that they had done so. The autopilot, which was designed with multiple layers of pilot alerting, continued to function as intended. However, the alerts were only effective if the pilots remained engaged with their primary duty, which was to navigate the aircraft. Ultimately, a flight steward contacted the cockpit to inquire about their expected arrival time. The pilot's comprehension occurred at this moment. The captain gazed downward at his navigation display, where he observed Duluth to his left and Eau Claire to his right, the spell of distraction now broken. They had exceeded their destination by more than 100 miles. At 8:12 p.m., the 4th Minneapolis controller attempted to establish communication once more. At the same time, Northwest Airlines dispatch transmitted an additional ACARS message. Flight 188 abruptly ceased its silence, but it did so at the incorrect frequency of 132.125 megahertz. The pilot's most recent acknowledgement of this frequency, 132.17 megahertz, was strikingly similar. Although the first officer's previous readback of the frequency was accurate, it appears that he did not activate it accurately at the time, potentially as a result of the previous distraction. In the A320 cockpit, the process of changing frequencies involves 2 steps. First, the desired frequency is selected using a rotary dial, and then the transfer switch is pressed to activate it. It appears that this step was not executed successfully for whatever reason. After inadvertently tuning into the frequency of Canada's Winnipeg Area Control Center, the crew informed controllers that they had exceeded their destination and needed to return. The Canadian controllers promptly determined the aircraft's location over Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and subsequently directed the pilots to the appropriate Minneapolis Center frequency. The pilot's explanation was, shall we say, somewhat understated when Flight 188 eventually established contact with Minneapolis Center at 8:14 p.m. Roger, we were distracted and have overshot Minneapolis. We are currently over Eau Claire and would like to make a 180-degree turn and land in Eau Claire. What the pilots were not yet cognizant of was that this distraction had precipitated significant security concerns 37,000 feet below them. Multiple layers of emergency response planning were initiated by the aircraft during the 1 hour and 17 minutes of silence, and the 2 pilots would shortly experience substantial repercussions as a result. Later, we will elaborate on this matter. The controllers, who were still profoundly concerned about potential security threats, required confirmation that the cockpit was not compromised. The pilots provided them with assurance that the flight deck was secure. No security compromise had occurred. I merely need to confirm that the cockpit is secure. It is secure, however, we became preoccupied. Controllers, who were still dubious about the situation, instructed the aircraft to execute specific flight maneuvers as they approached Minneapolis to confirm that the crew was in full control of the aircraft. The pilots would only respond that they had been preoccupied with company matters when asked about the reason for the extended radio silence, without providing any additional details. Would you be able to provide a concise explanation of the events that transpired? I can only describe it as a cockpit distraction. Northwest 188, is there any way you could provide further details regarding the distraction? I am currently unable to provide any further information, as we are currently addressing some business-related matters. They arrived on schedule, albeit more than an hour later than anticipated. Numerous agencies, including the FBI and the police, were anticipating the event. Breathalyzers were administered to both pilots without delay. 5 main substances of abuse were subjected to a subsequent drug screening. The results of all examinations were negative. The aftermath of Northwest Flight 188's radio silence was swift and severe. The FAA immediately launched an investigation, and both pilots had their licenses revoked just days later. Their failure to monitor radio communications for over an hour, combined with missing their destination by more than 100 miles, was deemed an unacceptable breach of duty. During the inquiry, the pilots stated that they had been engaged in a heated discussion about a new crew scheduling system and lost situational awareness. They neither heard radio calls nor noticed ACARS messages from dispatch. While fatigue was initially suspected, both pilots denied falling asleep, and no evidence proved otherwise. The incident underscored the importance of cockpit discipline and situational awareness. It also led to tighter regulations regarding pilot distractions emphasizing the need for strict adherence to sterile cockpit procedures. Ultimately, Northwest Flight 188 served as a stark reminder that even highly automated aircraft still require constant human vigilance to ensure safe operations. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below. What are your thoughts on this incident? Could stricter cockpit regulations have prevented it? Let's discuss.